Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio-Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's the Hillsdale Dialogue, and this is an important one. This is a very important one. They're all good. They're all useful. This is important because on Thursday, November the 16th, and that's Dr. Larry Arnn. He's the president of Hillsdale College, sitting there with his hand there looking very presidential. Dr. Arnn is the president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Last week's Hillsdale Dialogue is over at hughforhillsdale.com, but we're picking up on where we ended, even though it had nothing to do with the outline I prepared, which I'll put away and use another time. This one I'm going to use. On Thursday, November the 16th, the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, which is a godforsaken place and a godforsaken federal department, opened 7 investigations, the first since the invasion of Israel by Hamas on October the 7th. And those were Title VI shared ancestry investigations, which means nothing to the observer, but it's an investigation into prohibited use of race or ethnicity or religion on a campus, and that's by federal law. Hillsdale not so governed because it doesn't accept federal money. But all these places did. They opened 7 investigations. Lafayette College, Cornell University, Columbia University, Wesley College, University of Pennsylvania, the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, and something called Mays Unified School District. Now, those 7 investigations included 5 into anti-Semitism and 2 into Islamophobia. And if you heard me 3 weeks ago now, I denounced that as a gesture, not as a serious exercise of federal authority over rampant anti-Semitism, but as a gesture to satisfy certain elements of the Democratic Party that's concerned about anti-Semitism, because there was nothing about Harvard, my alma mater, or the University of Michigan, another of my alma maters, both of which have had virulent outbreaks of anti-Semitic, I would say, assault, the imminent, unpermitted touching, fear of touching, actually, or Northwestern, or the University of California, San Diego, or any of 100 college campuses. They don't know what to do because they're staffed by progressives. The 600 people work at that Office of Civil Rights in the vast Department of Education, Dr. Larry Arnn. And that's what they came up with. 7 investigations, 5 into anti-Semitism, 2 into Islamophobia, none into the very obvious incidents of anti-Semitic threatening behavior that we've seen at other campuses. What are we to say about that entire undertaking, that entire office and that entire department, other than they are extensions of the progressive movement in the United States, which is at odds with itself because it cannot actually attack the problem about which they're supposed to be devoted?
Yeah, well, we have to understand that we live under a different kind of government now. If you step back and take 30,000-foot view, you find out that politics is natural. People always live under it. It's not hard to analyze a regime and how does it work, right? The answer is who rules and why do they get to rule? Self-rule is very different than 600 people surveying a great nation and having enormous tools to influence what goes on the 4,000 so college campuses in America, and picking and choosing. Now, another way to do it would be to have real competition among them. But too much is standardized now because the funding source is standardized, and the funding source is driven by detailed rules, you see. And that's a new situation in America. That's, it's kind of old now. It's since the 1960s. But for most of American history, if you went to a college and you didn't like it, go to a different one. And because that's better, in my opinion, because a college education is not something you can give somebody. They have to want it, and they have to work hard to get it. And, everything has to be detailed to get them to do that. So what we've done is we've turned college campuses into public accommodations. And the truth is, I know some people, and we're going to help them, and they want to start a Jewish university after the fashion of Hillsdale College. And God bless them. And as I say, we're going to help them. But the other thing is, we talked about this last week or the week before. If a college is a place where everybody's screaming at everybody else and people are walking out afraid to talk, then you haven't been successful. And the solution is not to, in my opinion, and from my experience, which is narrow but deep. I say I've had one job in a college in my life. In my experience, the solution is not everybody gets to say whatever they want. That's part of it. The whole solution is everybody has to seek to be friends and argue seriously to the best of their ability. And people have to do that willingly. You don't have to make judgments like justice is the virtue that has to do with people getting what they deserve. And Aristotle, so much, he never describes in the Ethics, he never describes justice as beautiful. I owe this understanding to a man named Joe Sachs, who's a great teacher and translator of Aristotle from St. John's. Why? Because justice involves fixing stuff so much. There's been a dispute. Now we got to go into it and decide who's right. While you're doing that, you're not making much progress. It's way better if everybody just gets along because they intend to. And so this whole thing, right? The Arab-Israel, Arab-Jewish contest is ancient and one of the blights of the world. And it's not going to go away. Not for a long time. Ever, maybe. Till the lion lies down with the lamb. How do you arbitrate it? Well, I think you have to mean well by everybody there. But when you're picking sides, and you do have to pick sides sometimes, because you have to... Who's the ones who are killing the babies? Is a thing. Who's the one that respects the rights of their own people? Who's the one that takes care when they wage a battle about not destroying innocent people? Best they can, right? Who does that? And those things, those questions are not difficult to answer. Another thing is, and see, that's when you're 18 years old, or for that matter, when you're our age. I'm older than you, but when you're 70 years old, it's a great idea. It's a great idea to try to learn and look at the facts and possess yourself and think, right? So another question is, what right, the big, the immediate question that's raised, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean? That means the Jews got to go. Now, why are they there? And come to find out, that's a historic story. I happen to know a lot about that story because I studied with Martin Gilbert, who wrote that story, and I helped him. And it's a story that goes back, to ancient times, of course, but the modern story is discrete, and it's since
1897. Zionism begins with the speech in Switzerland by, and I'm blanking on his name right now, the founder of Zionism.
Herzl.
Yeah.
Theodore Herzl.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but the point is, it's that story doesn't affect necessarily this particular land. The Zionist movement starts with the idea we need a home somewhere. We don't get treated very well. And we haven't had a home for a long time, since Nebuchadnezzar.
Not since 70 A.D. The Romans destroyed their home.
But then the Middle East is controlled by the Ottoman Empire from early 16th century until 1918. And at the last minute, we're going to talk about this, in 1914, the Turks joined the Germans, and it turned out after unprecedented slaughter, they joined the wrong side.
Hold on to that thought. We're going to take a break. We're going to take a break. Coming right back, just as 1918 looms and the Allies are about to win, the alliance that Turkey signed on with Germany that we'll talk about next week was not a good move by them, and we'll explain why they lost their empire and millions of people. Stay tuned. Dr. Arnn will be right back. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
America, I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest. The Hillsdale Dialogue continues. Dr. Arnn, we are at 1918. We're going to be there again next week when we return to Churchill's Volume 1 of his First World War memoir. But we're at 1918. The Turks bet on the wrong side, and their empire, the Ottoman Empire, is being carved up by your friend and everyone's friend who listens to the show, Winston Churchill, and they create a mandate for the Brits to control, from which will come the Jewish state. And the people who are arguing from the river to the sea are arguing that we ought to go back to 1918 and repeal the Balfour Declaration. They're arguing against international law, and I don't think they know that. I don't think they know anything, actually.
Well, just think of it from the moral point of view. The Turkish Empire, the Turks joined the other side, right? And so now they're going to fight them. And the British have armies in the Middle East, and the French do too, fighting against the Turks, who declared war on them, understand. They didn't declare war on Turkey. So a bunch of Jews and a bunch of Arabs come to the British and say, we want to fight for you. Will you give us a state? And the Balfour Declaration you mentioned, which is from 1916, am I right?
Might be 1917.
That's the British answer to the Jews. And they formed the Jewish Brigade, and they fought on the side of the British and the French against the Turks. And in exchange for that service, they got a state. The Arabs did exactly the same thing. And they fought under T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And they got states. So it's the same time, it's the same service, and it's the same compensation, except that the Arabs got more. They got several states, right? Iraq is one of them. And the point, so the thing is, if the Jewish state is illegitimate, so is Iraq, and so is Syria, and so is Jordan, and so is Lebanon. You see, they come from the same place.
Let me ask you something. But the Balfour Declaration of 1917, by the way, did we ever do anything on T.E. Lawrence? Does anyone know anything? Did we do an hour on T.E. Lawrence? I don't think we did.
He's a great man, yeah. Yeah, he's in this book, in the World Crisis. But so we'll get to him. But I can tell you, there's a great contemporaries about him. Here's a funny thing about Winston Churchill. By the way, this is what education is like. Everything leads to everything else. And it's cool that it does that. Fun. T.E. Lawrence was a heck of a guy. And the movie, Lawrence of Arabia, which is one of the great movies, is a fair rendering of him. Some things that didn't happen, and he knew Winston Churchill very well. And he served. So, first of all, at the end of the First World War, a movement came up in the British, this war is way more expensive than anybody thought. We should get something for it. Let's take some of that Turkish land in the Middle East. Winston Churchill was against that and didn't want it. He said, we've got what we need, and that land is not. There should be a Jewish state, and there should be an Arab state. And for a long time, everybody thought they should be one state. They should all be together. That broke down. But not a British imperial possession in that part of the world. Immediately after the war, Churchill is appointed Secretary of State for the colonies. And the League of Nations gives Britain a mandate over Iraq and a couple of other places. And they give France a mandate over Syria, which if they'd wanted to, they could have used as an invitation to control those places. But Churchill didn't want to, and the British had decided in the war that they weren't going to do that. Churchill's number 2 in the colonial office was Lawrence of Arabia. And they together, first of all, pacified Iraq by using airplanes to shuttle troops around and cut the cost of it. Churchill believed in running the government economically, a lost art in America that we're soon going to have to learn because we're broke. We're $35 trillion from being broke. When we get that back, then we'll be broke. That's
well and deftly put. We're so far beyond broke. It's funny, but it's tragic. Larry, if you told your trustees, don't worry, we have enough money and tuition to operate this year, but we're $35 trillion in debt. You think they'd keep the college open? 1 minute, we got to go to break. It's absurd. We're living in absurd times. Don't even start. I want to come back to this because I don't want to interrupt your discussion of this when we have the short segment here. It's close to where my outline is. It's not really close to the outline, but it's at least in the same arena as the outline. It's in the same state as the outline. So don't go anywhere, America. We're going to come back and talk about the problem on America's colleges right after this. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That's Dr. Larry Arnn. He's president of Hillsdale College, which is not $35 trillion in debt. In fact, I believe it's quite liquid. If your children start there, they will be able to finish there, unlike some of the colleges and universities in the United States. Rightly so, I might add. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Something Dr. Arnn just said on this Hillsdale Dialogue, everything leads to everything else, is absolutely true. And we prove it every single week on the Hillsdale Dialogue. In my outline, it said that 3 questions in 3 segments. What does Hillsdale do about offensive speech versus offensive conduct? How to teach Israel? Does the First Amendment protect large demonstrations chanting, kill some Jews? And there are 3 different things with the lab, but we're just going to teach them all at one time. Doctor, how does T.E. Lawrence fit into all of that? Because it actually does, and we'll do that next week, the First World War.
Yeah, well, the point is, to understand that particular thing, many things are like this. I was about to say everything is like this, but I haven't thought of everything yet. First of all, what do the Jews mean, right? It's the first universal monotheism. It's a tremendous thing. I'm discovering lots of connections between the time of the birth of Judaism and India, but they're also separate. And so I don't know the story yet. There's so much to know. If I live to be 1,000, won't know it all. But the Jews are a great story. And if you just think of the promise to Abraham, I will be your God, and you will be my people, and this will be a blessing to all the peoples on the face of the earth. One God for everybody. The first God who doesn't go away in the West, the first God who doesn't go away when the people are conquered. And so that's a important thing and a good thing, I fancy. So that's one thing to know. What are these Jews about? And, they're about something great, in my opinion. The Arabs, too, depending on how you read it, of course. But Muhammad, which is 600 years later than Jesus, roughly, has many wonderful things to say. Also, Muhammad was a conqueror and a ruler, which Jesus was not. My kingdom is not of this world, said Jesus. So there are differences there, right? And the student should comprehend those differences, understand them impartially as they are. Let them talk to you. And there are certainly beautiful things in the Quran. I personally am a Christian and find many fine things in that, the finest things, I think. But Jews and Muslims have claims, and they should be understood. That's the first thing to sort out. The second thing to sort out is it's a property dispute. And who has a right to that property? And that, you can go back to God's commandments to Abraham when the Jews came out of, there are two commandments from God for Jews to go to the land of Canaan. First, Abraham, who was in Ur of Chaldea, which is in Iraq. And the second is to Moses. And he told them to conquer the people who were there. Hittites. There was a really great lecture by Joshua Katz on the campus this week. And he talked a lot about the Hittites. The Hittites are very ancient.
Was that well attended? Was that lecture well attended?
What?
Was the lecture by Jonathan Katz well attended?
Packed.
See, that's a college.
Of course.
That's a college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the Hittites are mostly in Anatolia, in current Turkey. But they ruled all the way down into Palestine and some other parts of the Middle East. And the point is, when you get back to the Hittites, you're getting back where things are lost in time, right? It's one big part. Joshua Katz said, he's a very learned man, by the way, and a delightful man. He said that one part of it, we know that these people were a big subgroup under the Hittites, and we know that they had relations with them, but we don't know much about them because there are not coins and stuff and pottery. You haven't found it. We know in the diplomatic correspondence of the Hittites that there was a Troy, and it has certain features. But they're nothing like that from Troy. Where is that stuff? We haven't found it. Now,
yet.
The point is, the Hittites are very, very ancient, right? And you're running out of gas when you get back that far. We know that the Hittites were conquerors, right? And that means go back as far as you can, and somebody's conquering somebody. So far in our knowledge. And that means that you won't arbitrate this dispute that way. You can't. The Hittites are mentioned in the command to Moses. Get up there. Throw out them Hittites, Jebusites, all them, right?
Canaanites.
And there's a more recent, we went through it already, but the point is the facts that led to the creation of Israel and several Arab states are similar facts that date immediately to 1917, to the Balfour Declaration. And I
want to insert here, Dr. Arnn, this past few weeks I've been talking often with Dan Senor, who is a fine podcaster, and he has on often, I asked him, we reviewed the history of Israel beginning with Herzl, and I said, what best book should I read about this and tell people about? Because that's the first question. Where do I learn more? And he said, The History of the Jews by Paul Johnson, but it's long and it can be hard. So if you want the short version, go and get The 100 Years' War on Palestine. No, that's the wrong one. Go and get Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, by Fred Sanders, because it starts with Herzl. So he said, forget all this stuff before Herzl. If you want the concise version, go get this book and we'll get you that far. But that is a truncated version because everything connects to everything. But at least it begins with Herzl and not with last week. And a lot of our colleges are beginning with last week. They're not even getting back to October 7th. They're beginning with last week. And it's an abomination. It's a disservice to every student. And colleges are going off the cliff.
Well, so with all due respect to Mr. Dan Senor.
Yeah. Dan Senor.
I hear great things about him and love him. I will also say that a better book yet is Martin Gilbert, Israel, A History. Because those are...
Does he go back to the beginning? Does he go back to Moses? Because he was trying to save us 2,000 years of work by going with the guy who started in 1917.
Well, so there's another. Martin Gilbert wrote 80 books. He's extremely reliable man. So here's a book by him: The Story of Israel: From Theodore Herzl to the Dream for Peace.
There you go.
I think that book may begin with Herzl. And so, and the point is, I testify to it that Martin Gilbert is an extremely careful man. And he's dead now, alas. His widow's alive. But his books are reliable. And they're written in chronological order. The Rutledge Atlas of the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Martin Gilbert wrote historical atlases, and they're wonderful. And you can just
why is it called the Rutledge Atlas?
Well, the way the style of them, there are many of them too, and they're really great. He drew the maps himself. He believed in it. In the Churchill biography, there's a large number of maps that he produced and spent a lot of money doing it, getting a guy to lay them out just right and all that. But the style of the maps is there'll be a map of the place where things happen. And then there'll be little boxes and arrows showing movements. And the boxes give you the historical facts. If you want to know, and if I remember correctly, I can't open it right now, but the Atlas of the Arab-Israeli conflict, I believe it begins in 1948.
I've got to go and get that. We got to go to break. I'm going to come back and talk about Sir Martin in a moment and about the atlases. We're mixing up our outlines, but that doesn't matter because this is actually the essence of every Hillsdale dialogue. Stay tuned, America. Except at hillsdale.edu, you'll find it all, or at hughforhillsdale.com.
Hello, this is Kyle Mernon, Director of Online Learning here at Hillsdale College. And I'm excited to announce that we've brought Hillsdale's popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. And our next course is The Real American Founding, which is taught by Hillsdale professors David Azrad and Thomas West. After completing this course, you'll understand the political theory of the American founding, and you'll see how and why we've departed so far from the American founding today. This Hillsdale College online course podcast is hosted by me and my colleague Juan Davalos, and it looks to expand Hillsdale's mission to provide all who wish to learn the education necessary to preserve the civil and religious liberties of America. And we want you to be a part of it at podcast.hillsdale.edu. Subscribe now to the Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu. Thanks for listening.
One of my New Year's resolutions, America, is I'm going to go up to Long Beach State. And at Long Beach State are the archives of the 10 years I served as a co-host on something called Life and Times. When my hair was brown and Dr. Arnn had no gray in his beard, Dr. Arnn would come in occasionally to the studio of KCET, but he also managed to corral Dr. Harry Jaffa to come sit with me occasionally, and he got Sir Martin Gilbert to come to the studio once, and I have a tape of Sir Martin Gilbert talking about Churchill in those archives at Long Beach State that I've got to retrieve and get up to you for your Martin Gilbert collection to put in with all. Did he do just one atlas or many atlases? And why are they called Rutledge atlases?
Well, Rutledge is a publisher.
Okay, okay, that's it.
So here's one, Atlas of Jewish History. That's the whole ballgame. And it's,
everything.
I'm just telling you. So Martin Gilbert had three great beliefs grouped under a transcendent one, and that is history is about the things that really happened. And so you can find out what happened with, as he used to say, in the writing of 19th and 20th century history, there is no room for the word perhaps. And if you ever wrote him a note and had perhaps in it, he would circle it and write out here in the margin, perhaps not. And so you learn not to do that. He used to say, you have a good memory and I have a good memory, and we do not rely upon our memories. And to this day, who knows? You may notice that I enter many caveats, like roughly and about like this when we're talking on the radio. But if I write something, I always look it up.
Montaigne writes in his essays, every time he trusted his memory, almost every time he was wrong. And I've always kept that close to my heart. That's right.
So you got to, and that's the work of a serious person to try to verify as much as you can all the time. Then he had the truth, since writing began, and we have a lot, since the time when we have a lot of writing. My colleague, Professor Paul Ray, R-A-H-E, is writing a multi-volume history of Sparta that is going to be like his first 3-volume work, Republics, Ancient and Modern. It's an achievement. It's the best, most thorough telling of the Spartan story that anybody's ever done. He's going to live on. His life is going to live on through these books and other things he's done. Anyway, when you read his story of Sparta, it's not like the Churchill biography. There's a fair amount of extrapolation and speculation because the records are sparse. And that means that you can't know as well. And he being a guide, he's a very fair man and inspired intellect. And so he's helping you understand Sparta better than you ever could, and relying on all the evidence that exists. So you learn what that is, too, you see. So he will say, perhaps and probably in those books, and Martin Gilbert never does.
But that's because he has no alternative. Because as opposed to the 20th and 19th century, where there is no perhaps, there's only perhaps in 6th century BC, except for what is actually known.
In his lecture this week, Joshua Katz, now he's talking about the Hittites, and it's extrapolated from a piece of pottery and a coin, and they can do a lot with that, right? But is it as well known as the actions of Winston Churchill about the Dardanelles or in the Second World War? We have the actual words he spoke.
Next week, we're going to talk about the Goeben. And one of my questions to you is, why is there all this stuff on the Goeben? And we'll get to that next week. But we know what happened to the Goeben because Churchill wrote it all down for whatever reason. He wrote it all down, Dr. Arnn. And we're going to get there next week. Don't go anywhere, America, except over to hillsdale.edu. Or go to hughforhillsdale.com. We're going back to World War I next week. And I would recommend to all of you, Dr. Arnn and I have been reading this book, Winston Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 1, and we're never going to get out of it. We might not even get to Volume 2 by the end of 2024, but we're going to do our best. Don't go anywhere except to hillsdale.edu for everything else, including Dr. Arnn's remarkable podcast. Are you going to carry the Katz lecture? We got a minute, Doctor. Is the Katz lecture going to be over at hillsdale.edu?
It was not taped, I'm pretty sure. But he's going to come back, and we just had a rebellion because they happened at Hillsdale too. He's going to come back and teach a 2-week, I think, course. And he's,
I hope you videograph that one because I would love to hear about the Hittites. I've actually never heard the Hittites brought up on modern broadcast before.
They got 18 students signed up, and that's a seminar. And so then they went to 22, and then he protested, and I protested. Now he's got 38, and it's still growing. So it's going to be like, everybody wants to take it. I want to take it.
That's Hillsdale.edu. I'll be back next week, America, with the next installment. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay on this great radio station.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.